Breaking the tags. The moment Vernon Kincaid's hand cracked across the girl's face, Caleb Hart knew he wasn't walking away. 4 months a widower. 4 months of silence and snow. 4 months of trying to forget what a full house sounded like. Then he rode into Red Willow Crossing and found 7 children lined up like cattle at auction, each wearing a paper tag that named their brokenness for the world to see. The richest man in 3 counties was already grabbing one boy by the collar, already treating flesh and blood like property he could break in. Caleb had buried enough. He wasn't burying this. If you want to see how far a promise can carry a broken man and the children no one else wanted, stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far these 7 lives can travel. The train platform at Red Willow Crossing was nothing but frozen mud and weathered planks, the kind of place where people came to leave, not to arrive. Caleb Hart sat his horse at the edge of the small crowd, his hat pulled low, his collar turned up against the wind that cut down from the mountains like a knife looking for skin. He hadn't planned to stop. He'd been riding the territory line for weeks now, checking fence posts that didn't need checking, avoiding the ranch house that echoed too loud with absence. But the train had come in, and with it, something that made the crowd gather. Children. 7 of them, to be exact. They stood in a ragged line on the platform, flanked by a pair of grim-faced women in dark wool coats, and a man in a cheap suit who kept consulting a leather ledger like he was counting inventory. The children ranged in age from maybe 5 to 14, their clothes patched and ill-fitting, their faces pale from travel and fear. Each one wore a paper tag pinned to their chest. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd heard about the orphan trains. Everyone had. The Children's Aid Society shipped kids west from the overcrowded cities, placed them with families who needed extra hands. Sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it was just legalized labor trafficking with a charitable veneer. The crowd pressed closer, townspeople eyeing the children with varying degrees of interest and calculation. Some looked genuinely moved. Others looked like they were evaluating horseflesh. Vernon Kincaid stood at the front. Of course he did. Kincaid owned half the county, timber, cattle, water rights, and the bank that held mortgages on most of the other half. He was a big man, barrel-chested and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He dressed like money and carried himself like power, and right now he was looking at those children the way a man looks at tools he's considering purchasing. "This one," Kincaid said, pointing to a boy of about 10 with dark hair and watchful eyes. The tag on his chest read "Troublemaker" in block letters. "Strong build, good hands. What's his history?" The man with the ledger cleared his throat. "Thomas Brennan, age 10, orphaned 18 months ago. Foster placements unsuccessful due to behavioral issues." "I don't need his life story," Kincaid cut in. "I need to know if he can work." "Mr. Kincaid," one of the women interjected, her voice tight with forced civility, "these children are not laborers. They are placements. The society requires families willing to take them in," Kincaid said smoothly. "I'm offering that. Food, shelter, education, and practical skills. That's more than most of them had back east." He reached out and grabbed the boy's arm, turning him roughly to examine his shoulders and back. The boy, Thomas, went rigid but didn't resist. His eyes found the oldest girl in the line, and something silent passed between them. The girl was tall for her age, maybe 14, with copper-red hair that hung in a thick braid and eyes the color of winter moss. She wore a coat that was too thin and boots that were too big, but she stood with her spine straight and her chin up. Her tag read, "Defective." "Let him go," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear, cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a blade through silk. Kincaid turned, his smile widening. "Excuse me?" "I said let him go." The girl took a step forward, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You don't touch any of them without asking first." The crowd went quiet. Kincaid released the boy and moved toward the girl with the slow, deliberate menace of a man who'd never been challenged and didn't intend to start now. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But out here, young lady, spirit without respect gets corrected real quick." He reached for her, and she slapped his hand away. The crack of palm meeting skin rang out across the platform. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Kincaid's face went dark, and his open hand came up fast and hard, catching the girl across the cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side. She staggered, but didn't fall, didn't cry, just turned back to face him with blood welling at the corner of her mouth and pure defiance burning in her eyes. That was when Caleb dismounted. He didn't hurry, didn't run, just swung down from the saddle with the kind of economy that came from years of moving through the world like a man who understood violence and chose his application of it carefully. His boots hit the platform with a solid thud, and he walked through the crowd with a silence that made people step aside without thinking about it. Vernon Kincaid was still staring down at the girl, his hand raised for another blow, when Caleb's voice stopped him cold. "That's enough." 2 words. Quiet. Final. Kincaid turned, and his expression shifted through surprise, recognition, and irritation in the space of a breath. "Caleb Hart. Didn't expect to see you in town. Thought you'd taken to haunting that ranch of yours like a ghost." "Step away from the girl," Caleb said. "This doesn't concern you." "I'm making it concern me." The 2 men faced each other across 6 feet of frozen planks in winter air. Kincaid had size and money and the kind of confidence that came from owning everything he touched. Caleb had something else, something that lived in the set of his shoulders and the steadiness of his gaze, something that had been forged in darker places than a train platform in Wyoming territory. "These children are here to be placed," Kincaid said, his voice taking on the tone of a man explaining something to someone slow. "I'm offering to take one. Maybe 2. That's charity, Hart. Christian generosity." "You hit a child in front of witnesses," Caleb replied. "That's assault. And the way you were looking at that boy wasn't generosity. It was commerce." Kincaid's jaw tightened. "You've been alone too long, Hart. It's made you forget how things work." "How things work," Caleb repeated slowly, "is that you're going to let go of any claim to these kids, get back in your carriage, and go home. Right now." "Or what?" Caleb didn't answer with words. He just held Kincaid's gaze with the flat, unblinking stare of a man who'd seen death up close and wasn't particularly afraid of meeting it again. The crowd held its breath. Finally, Kincaid smiled, sharp and cold. "You want to play shepherd to a pack of broken city rats? That's your business. But don't come crying when they rob you blind or burn your house down." He turned and walked toward his carriage, his boots striking the platform like a judge's gavel. The crowd began to disperse, some disappointed, some relieved, all of them already composing the story they'd tell about what they'd witnessed. Caleb turned to the children. They were still standing in their line, frozen in place like rabbits under the shadow of a hawk. The society workers had retreated to the edge of the platform, clearly unsure whether to intervene or flee. The girl with the bloodied mouth was staring at him with an expression caught between suspicion and something that might have been hope if hope hadn't been beaten out of her years ago. He walked down the line slowly, reading the tags. Troublemaker, defective, wild, strange, mute, unknown, unknown. 7 children. 7 labels that reduced human beings to problems someone else didn't want to solve. Caleb looked at the man with the ledger. What happens to them if no one takes them? The man shifted uncomfortably. They return to the city. Institutional placement, most likely. Orphanages. Yes. The kind where they get 3 meals a day and an education? The man said nothing. He didn't have to. Everyone knew what happened to children who ended up back in the system. The lucky ones survived. The rest just disappeared. Caleb pulled off his gloves and reached for the first tag. "What are you doing?" the girl demanded. "What I should have done the minute I saw these," he said, and ripped the paper free. Troublemaker tore in half and fluttered to the platform. He moved to the next child, a small boy with enormous eyes and tangled black hair. Wild. Gone. Then a thin girl of about 8 with a burn scar creeping up her neck. Strange. Destroyed. One by one, he tore them free, the labels, the judgments, the casual cruelty of adults who'd decided these children were problems instead of people. He crushed the papers in his fist until they were nothing but pulp and went still. "You're all coming with me," he said. The silence that followed was absolute. The girl, the defiant one with the split lip, found her voice first. Why? Because you need a place, and I've got one. You don't know us. You don't know what we've done or where we've been, or... Don't need to, Caleb interrupted. You're children. That's all I need to know. We're not charity cases, she shot back. We're not going to call you Papa and pretend to be grateful while you work us to death or worse. Caleb met her eyes, saw the fear beneath the fury, saw the way she'd positioned herself between him and the smaller children without even thinking about it. I'm not asking you to call me anything, he said quietly. I'm not asking you to be grateful. I'm offering you a roof, food, and safety. What you do with that is up to you, but I won't hurt you, and I won't let anyone else hurt you either. That's the only promise I'm making. The girl studied him for a long moment, her jaw working like she was chewing on words too sharp to swallow. Finally, she turned to the other children, her pack, her responsibility, her family of circumstance and survival. What do you think? The boy who'd been labeled troublemaker spoke first. Better than going back. A small blonde girl of maybe 5 or 6 nodded silently. The boy with black hair just stared at Caleb with unreadable dark eyes. The girl with the copper braid turned back to Caleb. If any of them get hurt, if you lay a hand on even one of them, I will burn your house to the ground and dance in the ashes. Understand? Understood, Caleb said. She held out her hand, not in surrender, in negotiation. He shook it. Rowan, she said. Rowan Hale. Caleb Hart. We're a package deal, Mr. Hart. All 7 or none? All 7, he confirmed. The society workers were stammering protests about procedures and paperwork and home inspections, but Caleb ignored them. He'd deal with the bureaucracy later. Right now, he had 7 half-frozen children who needed to get somewhere warm. He looked at the smallest girl, the blonde one who hadn't spoken. What's your name, sweetheart? She pressed closer to Rowan but whispered, Elsie? Elsie, Caleb repeated. Pretty name. You like horses? A tiny nod. Good, because we've got a ride ahead of us. Watson. The ranch was 6 miles outside Red Willow Crossing, tucked into a valley where the Bitterroot River curved through pine and cottonwood. The house was 2 stories of weathered timber and stone, built solid to withstand mountain winters. There was a barn, a smokehouse, a chicken coop, and enough land to run cattle or grow crops, or both if a man had the energy and the help. Caleb had neither. For 4 months, the place had been a mausoleum. He'd lived in 3 rooms and let the rest gather dust and silence. He'd eaten when he remembered and slept when exhaustion dragged him under and spent his days doing work that didn't need doing just to keep moving. Now he was bringing 7 children into it. The ride back was quiet. Rowan sat behind him on his horse, her arms locked around his waist with a tension that had nothing to do with balance and everything to do with distrust. The other children were divided between a borrowed wagon driven by the deputy who had helped Caleb load them up and his own pack horse, which carried the few belongings they'd brought with them, a shared trunk that probably weighed less than a sack of flour. When they finally rode into the yard, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and violet. The house stood dark and unwelcoming, every window blank, every door shut tight. Caleb dismounted and helped the children down. They clustered together instinctively, their eyes scanning the buildings and the tree line like soldiers assessing hostile territory. It's not much, Caleb said, but it's warm and it's dry and it's yours now. Rowan's gaze swept over the ranch with the sharp assessment of someone who'd learned to evaluate every new place as either refuge or trap. Where do we sleep? Upstairs, 4 bedrooms. You'll have to share, but there's real beds and clean blankets. Where do you sleep? Downstairs. Why? The question was blunt, suspicious. Because that's where my room is, Caleb said simply. And because I figured you'd feel safer if you had the second floor to yourselves. Door at the top of the stairs locks from your side if you want it to. Something flickered in Rowan's expression. Surprise, maybe, or the first hairline crack in her armor. Come on, Caleb said. Let's get you inside before you all freeze. He led them into the house, through the mudroom, and into the kitchen. It was cold. He hadn't lit a fire in days, but it was clean and solid. The long table could seat 10. The stove was iron and reliable. The pantry still held supplies from before Sarah died. He pushed the thought away and knelt by the stove, feeding and kindling and striking a match. The fire caught, and warmth began to seep into the room like a living thing. The children watched him with the wary stillness of animals testing a new environment. "Rowan," Caleb said without turning around, "there's bread in the pantry and butter in the cold box. Ham, too, if I remember right. Can you make sandwiches for everyone?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Thomas, help me. Elsie, you sit." The girl obeyed immediately, and Caleb noted the hierarchy. Rowan led, Thomas backed her up, and the others followed. They'd built their own structure, their own rules. He'd be smart to respect that. While Rowan and Thomas worked, Caleb filled the kettle and set it on the stove. Then he turned to the boy who'd been labeled mute, a slight dark-eyed child of maybe 7 who hadn't made a sound since the platform. "What's your name?" Caleb asked gently. The boy stared at him but didn't answer. "He doesn't talk," Rowan said from the pantry. "His name's Noah. He can hear you fine, but he hasn't spoken in 2 years. "That's all right," Caleb said, meeting Noah's eyes. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but if you need something, you come find me, okay?" Noah considered this, then gave a single, solemn nod. Caleb moved through the rest of them, learning names and ages and the little pieces they were willing to share. Thomas, 10, who had a sharp mind and sharper tongue. Maddie, 8, whose burn scar came from a tenement fire that killed her parents. The twins, Jonah and Micah, both 6, who spoke in half sentences that only made sense when you combined them. And Elsie, 5, who clung to Rowan like a shadow and watched everything with huge, solemn eyes. 7 children, 7 lives that had been broken and discarded and shipped west like damaged goods. They ate in silence, thick sandwiches and hot tea that steamed in the cold air. Caleb watched them devour the food with the desperate efficiency of people who'd learned not to take meals for granted. When they finished, Rowan stacked the plates without being asked and carried them to the sink. "You don't have to," Caleb started. "We pay our way," Rowan cut in. "We're not parasites." "I didn't say you were." "You're thinking it." "Actually," Caleb said quietly, "I was thinking you've been taking care of these kids for a long time, and maybe it's time someone took care of you too." Rowan went very still, her hands frozen in the dishwater. Caleb stood. "Come on. I'll show you the upstairs." The second floor had 4 bedrooms, a washroom, and a hallway lined with family photographs that Caleb had stopped looking at months ago. He opened doors, showed them where blankets were stored, where the chamber pots were kept, how the windows latched. The children explored with cautious wonder, touching furniture like they expected it to vanish. "Girls in here," Rowan announced, pointing to the largest room. "Boys across the hall. Elsie sleeps with me." No one argued. Caleb left them to settle and went back downstairs. He stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of footsteps overhead, of young voices murmuring, of life returning to a house that had forgotten what it sounded like. Then he sat down at the table, put his head in his hands, and let himself feel the enormity of what he'd just done. 7 children. He didn't know how to be a father. He'd barely known how to be a husband before Sarah got sick, before the coughing started and didn't stop, before he'd held her hand and watched her slip away into silence. But he knew what it felt like to be unwanted, to be labeled, to have the world decide you were broken beyond fixing, and he knew, bone deep and certain, that he couldn't have walked away. Upstairs, something thudded. A door closed. Someone laughed, quickly stifled, but real. Caleb lifted his head and looked at the empty chair across from him, the one Sarah used to occupy. "What the hell did I just do?" he thought. But he already knew the answer. He'd made a promise. Now he just had to figure out how to keep it. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. Caleb lay awake in his room, listening to the house creak and settle, waiting for disaster. But no one screamed, no one ran, no one tried to steal the horses or burn the place down. When dawn broke cold and clear, he rose, dressed, and went to start the fire. The kitchen was already warm. Rowan stood at the stove, frying eggs with the competence of someone who'd cooked 1,000 meals. Thomas was setting the table. The twins were carrying wood from the mudroom. Even Noah was helping, carefully placing cups at each seat. They all froze when they saw him. "Morning," Caleb said carefully. "Morning," Rowan replied, her tone neutral. "We didn't know when you'd be up. Figured we'd help." "I appreciate it." She nodded once and went back to the eggs. They ate together, all 8 of them crowded around the table that had sat empty for so long. The meal was simple but good, and when it was done, Caleb stood. "All right," he said. "Here's how this works. This is a ranch. There's work that needs doing, animals to feed, water to haul, firewood to split, repairs to make. You'll all help with that, but not as punishment. You'll help because that's how a household runs. Everyone contributes. Everyone benefits. Fair?" Wary nods. "Second," Caleb continued, "there are rules. No lying, no stealing, no hurting each other. If you've got a problem, you bring it to me or to Rowan. We solve it with words first. Violence is the last resort, not the first. Understood?" More nods. "Third, and this is important, you are not servants, you are not labor, you are children, and you will be treated as such. That means school when the weather allows, time to play, and privacy when you need it. This is your home now, not a workhouse, not a prison, home." Elsie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't make a sound. Rowan's jaw was tight. "And if we break the rules?" "Then we talk about it," Caleb said, "and we figure out how to do better." "That's it? No beatings? No locking us in the cellar?" "No." She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Caleb met her gaze steadily. "I'm not going to hurt you, Rowan. None of you. That's not a rule. That's a fact." For the first time since the train platform, he saw something crack in her expression, something raw and desperate and young. Then she turned away. "Come on, Thomas. Let's get the dishes done." Well, the days that followed settled into a rhythm. Caleb woke early, started the fires, and began the work of bringing the ranch back to life. The children rose with the sun, ate together, and divided the chores without complaint. They were careful around him, polite, efficient, and utterly unwilling to relax. But slowly, incrementally, things began to shift. Thomas asked questions about the horses and started helping in the barn. Maddie began humming while she worked, soft melodies that sounded like lullabies. The twins discovered the chickens and appointed themselves official egg collectors. Even Noah, silent Noah, started following Caleb around like a shadow, watching everything he did with those dark, unreadable eyes. Rowan remained vigilant. She slept with a knife under her pillow. Caleb knew because he'd seen the handle when he'd brought up extra blankets. She never turned her back on him, never let Elsie out of her sight, never stopped calculating escape routes and defensive positions. But she also started to unbend, fraction by fraction. One evening, Caleb found her in the barn, grooming one of the horses with fierce concentration. "You're good with her," he observed. Rowan didn't look up. "I worked at a stable once. Before." "Before what?" "Before I wasn't useful anymore." Caleb leaned against the stall door. "What made you not useful?" She was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving in steady strokes through the horse's mane. Finally, she said, "I got sick, fever. The family I was with didn't want to risk their own kids catching it, so they sent me back." "That's why your tag said defective." "Yeah." "You're not defective, Rowan. That's what they all say," she replied, her voice flat. "Right up until they decide you are." Caleb considered his next words carefully. "I lost my wife 4 months ago, lung fever. I sat with her every day while she got sicker, held her hand, read to her. And when she died, I wanted to die too. For a while, I thought maybe I would just stop eating, stop moving, stop trying, but I didn't. You know why?" Rowan finally looked at him. "Because grief isn't the same as broken," Caleb said quietly. "And neither is being sick or scared or angry. You've been through hell, and you're still standing, still protecting your pack. That's not defective. That's strong." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her voice stayed steady. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Mr. Hart." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just telling you the truth." He left her there in the barn, and when she came in for dinner an hour later, her eyes were red, but her shoulders were straighter. The trouble came on a Thursday. Caleb was in town picking up supplies when he heard the rumors. Vernon Kincaid had been asking questions about the Hart Ranch, about the children, about guardianship paperwork. He'd made visits to the county clerk and the territorial judge. He'd sent letters east to the Children's Aid Society. He was building a case. When Caleb got home, Rowan was waiting on the porch. "Something's wrong," she said immediately. "What is it?" He told her. Her face went white, then red, then hard as stone. "He's coming for us." "Not if I can help it." "You can't stop him," Rowan said, her voice rising. "He's rich. He's powerful. He can buy judges and sheriffs and whoever else he needs. You're my responsibility now," Caleb interrupted firmly. "And I don't give up on my responsibilities." "Why?" The word burst out of her like a wound breaking open. "Why do you even care? You didn't know us a week ago. We're nothing to you." Caleb looked at this fierce, terrified girl who'd taken on the weight of 6 other lives before she was old enough to carry her own. "You're not nothing," he said quietly. "You're Rowan, and Thomas, and Maddie, and the twins, and Noah, and Elsie. You're 7 people who deserved better than what you got. And maybe I can't fix everything that's been done to you, but I can sure as hell make sure no one does it again." Rowan's breath hitched. Then she turned and ran inside, and Caleb heard her footsteps pounding up the stairs. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper, drafting the guardianship petition that would make this official. Legal. Binding. Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains. And somewhere in Red Willow Crossing, Vernon Kincaid sharpened his knives. The morning came sharp and cold, the kind of winter dawn that made breath visible and fingers ache. Caleb had been awake for hours. The guardianship petition spread across the kitchen table like a battle plan. The legal language felt foreign in his mouth as he read it over. Whereases and therefores and party of the first part. But the meaning was clear enough. He was asking the territorial court to grant him permanent custody of 7 children he'd known for less than 2 weeks. It should have felt insane. Instead, it felt inevitable. Footsteps on the stairs pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to find Noah standing in the doorway, barefoot and silent, watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to hold more weight than any 7-year-old should carry. "Morning," Caleb said quietly. "Couldn't sleep?" Noah shook his head. "Me neither." Caleb gestured to the chair beside him. "Want to sit?" The boy pattered across the floor and climbed into the chair, his small frame nearly swallowed by it. He looked at the papers on the table, then at Caleb, a question written clear in his expression, even if his voice stayed locked away. "It's paperwork," Caleb explained. "Legal stuff to make sure you and the others can stay here. To make it official that you're under my protection." Noah's eyes widened slightly. "There's a man in town, Mr. Kincaid, who wants to challenge that. He thinks he has a better claim to you kids. He's wrong, but he's got money and influence, so we have to do this the right way, through the courts." The boy reached out and touched the edge of the petition with one finger, tracing the words he probably couldn't read. "I won't let him take you," Caleb said, his voice low and certain. "Any of you. I made a promise, and I keep my promises." Noah looked up at him, and for just a moment, something cracked in that carefully guarded face, something that looked like hope warring with terror. Then the moment passed, and the boy withdrew his hand and climbed down from the chair. But he didn't leave. Instead, he moved to stand beside Caleb, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and together they watched the sun rise through the kitchen window, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of copper and gold. By the time the others came down for breakfast, Caleb had made his decision. He would ride to the territorial courthouse that afternoon and file the petition himself. It would take weeks to process, maybe longer, but at least it would be on record. Official. Harder to contest. Rowan appeared in the kitchen doorway, Elsie's hand clasped firmly in hers. The older girl's eyes went immediately to the papers on the table, then to Caleb's face. "You're really doing it," she said. Not a question. "I'm really doing it. What if they say no? Then I appeal, and if that doesn't work, I find another way." Thomas came in behind them, followed by Maddie and the twins. They all looked rumpled and sleepy, but they moved with the practiced efficiency of children who'd learned to be useful early and often. Thomas started the coffee. Maddie fetched eggs from the cold box. The twins set the table with mismatched precision. "Mr. Hart," Rowan said carefully, "what happens if Kincaid shows up here while you're gone?" It was the question Caleb had been dreading. "You lock the doors," he said. "You don't let anyone in. Not Kincaid, not his men, not anyone you don't know. If they try to force entry, Thomas, you take everyone upstairs to the back bedroom. There's a rifle in my room. You know how to shoot?" "Yes, sir," Thomas said quietly. "You point it at the door and you tell them the law's been called. You don't fire unless you absolutely have to, but you make damn sure they know you will if they don't leave." Rowan's face had gone pale. "You really think it'll come to that?" "I think Kincaid's used to getting what he wants, and I think he doesn't take kindly to being told no." Caleb met her eyes. "But I also think he's smart enough to know that breaking into a man's home with witnesses present is a crime even his money can't buy his way out of. He'll try legal channels first. And when those don't work, we'll deal with that when we come to it." Breakfast was quiet, the weight of unspoken fears pressing down on them all like a physical thing. Caleb ate without tasting, his mind already racing ahead to courthouses and judges and the labyrinth of territorial law he'd have to navigate. After the meal, he saddled his horse and checked the loads in his revolver out of habit more than expectation. The children gathered in the yard to watch him prepare, a silent cluster of worry and winter coats. "I'll be back before dark," he told them. "Rowan's in charge. You mind her like you'd mind me." "Yes, sir," came the chorus of replies. Caleb swung into the saddle, then paused. He looked down at their upturned faces. Thomas with his sharp intelligence and sharper tongue, Maddie with her burned scars and her humming, the twins who spoke in halves and made a whole, Noah with his silence that spoke volumes, little Elsie who watched everything and trusted nothing, and Rowan, fierce Rowan with her walls and her wounds and her desperate, defiant love for the pack she'd claimed as her own. 7 children who'd been thrown away like damaged goods. 7 lives he'd decided were worth fighting for. "I'll come back," he said, and the words felt like an oath. "I promise." Then he turned his horse toward town and rode out into the cold. The territorial courthouse sat on the main street of Red Willow Crossing, a 2-story brick building that doubled as the land office and the seat of county government. Caleb tied his horse at the rail and climbed the steps, the guardianship petition folded in his coat pocket like a weapon he wasn't quite sure how to use. The clerk was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the harried expression of someone perpetually behind on paperwork. He looked up when Caleb entered, his face shifting from mild annoyance to wary recognition. "Mr. Hart, what brings you in today?" "Need to file a guardianship petition," Caleb said, placing the papers on the desk. The clerk's eyebrows rose. "Guardianship? For how many children?" 7. The man's pen actually stopped mid-stroke. 7 children? All at once? "They came in on the orphan train last week. I'm taking them in." The clerk picked up the petition and began to read, his expression shifting through surprise, skepticism, and something that might have been respect. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Hart. The court typically requires extensive vetting for guardian placements. Home inspections, character references, proof of financial stability. I've got a working ranch, no debt, and a clean record," Caleb interrupted. "I can provide references from the deputy sheriff and half a dozen ranchers in the valley. What else do you need?" "It's not about what I need, it's about what Judge Whitmore will require. And given that Mr. Kincaid has already filed a competing petition for temporary custody of 4 of these same children." Caleb's hand slammed down on the desk, hard enough to make the inkwell jump. "He did what?" The clerk flinched. "Filed this morning. He's claiming that as a prominent landowner with substantial resources and community standing, he's better positioned to provide for the children's welfare. He's specifically requesting custody of the boys, Thomas Brennan and the 3 younger males." "The hell he is?" "Mr. Hart, I understand your frustration, but this is a legal matter now. The judge will have to weigh both petitions and make a determination based on who's got more money," Caleb said bitterly. "That's what it always comes down to, isn't it?" The clerk looked uncomfortable. "Judge Whitmore is a fair man. He'll consider all factors." "When's the hearing?" "He hasn't set one yet. Probably won't until after he reviews both petitions and orders the home inspections." "How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Caleb felt the rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. 3 weeks. 3 weeks for Kincaid to maneuver and manipulate and buy whatever influence he needed. 3 weeks for the children to live in limbo, wondering if they'd be ripped apart and handed over to a man who looked at them like livestock. He forced himself to take a breath. Then another. Violence wouldn't help here. This was a different kind of fight. "File the petition," he said quietly. "Mr. Hart, file it. Today. And tell Judge Whitmore I'm requesting an expedited hearing on the grounds that the children's welfare is at immediate risk." The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "I'll make sure he gets it." Caleb left the courthouse and stood on the steps, his hands shaking with suppressed fury. Across the street, he could see the Kincaid Land and Cattle Company office, its windows gleaming in the winter sun. Vernon Kincaid's carriage was parked out front, the matched team of grays standing patient and expensive. Every instinct Caleb possessed screamed at him to cross that street and settle this the old way, with fists and blood and the kind of violence that made men think twice about crossing you again. But he had 7 children depending on him now, 7 reasons to stay on the right side of the law. He turned away from Kincaid's office and walked toward the general store instead. If he was going to be fighting legal battles, he'd need supplies. Paper, ink, law books if he could find them, and maybe Caleb Hart. The voice stopped him cold. He turned to find Vernon Kincaid standing on the boardwalk, dressed in a fine wool coat and polished boots, his silver-threaded hair impeccable beneath his hat. He smiled the way a wolf might smile at a lamb. "Heard you were in town," Kincaid said pleasantly. "Filing paperwork at the courthouse, I'm told. Funny coincidence. I was just there myself this morning." "Nothing funny about it," Caleb replied, his voice flat. "I suppose not." Kincaid stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of casual authority. "Look, Hart, I know we got off on the wrong foot at the train station. That business with the girl, I was out of line. Heat of the moment. But I've been thinking about those children, and I believe I can offer them opportunities you simply can't provide. They're not for sale, Kincaid. I'm not trying to buy them. I'm trying to help them." His voice took on a tone of practiced sincerity. 4 boys, Hart. Growing boys who need education, discipline, proper training for the world ahead of them. You're one man on a failing ranch. I've got resources, connections, the ability to set them up for real futures. Why are you fighting this? "Because I've seen how you treat things you consider your property," Caleb said quietly. "And those children are not property. They're people." "Sentimental nonsense," Kincaid dismissed. "You've been alone too long. You're looking for something to fill the hole your wife left, and you think a house full of orphans will do it. But it won't. All you're doing is condemning them to poverty and isolation when they could have so much more. With you. With someone who understands how the world works." Caleb met his eyes. "I understand how your world works, Kincaid. Money buys influence. Influence buys power. Power lets you take whatever you want and call it charity. I've seen men like you before. Hell, I've worked for men like you. And I'll tell you the same thing I told the last one. I don't care how much money you have. Those children are under my protection, and they're staying that way." Kincaid's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "The court will decide that. Not you." "Then I guess we'll see what the court says." "Yes," Kincaid said softly. "We will." He tipped his hat and walked away, his boots clicking on the boardwalk with metronomic precision. Caleb stood there for a long moment, watching him go, feeling the weight of the fight ahead settling onto his shoulders like a yoke. Then he went into the general store and bought paper and ink and a law book that cost him 3 days' wages. The ride back to the ranch took longer than it should have. Caleb kept his horse to a walk, his mind churning through possibilities and strategies. He needed character references, solid ones from people the court would respect. He needed to document the children's welfare, their education, their integration into the household. He needed to prove that he could provide not just shelter and food, but a real home. And he needed to do it all while Kincaid used every advantage money and influence could buy. The sun was sinking toward the mountains when he finally rode into the yard. The house was lit from within, golden light spilling from the windows, and he could hear voices, young voices, raised in what sounded like argument or maybe laughter. He dismounted and walked to the porch, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. The door flew open before he could knock. Rowan stood there, her face flushed and her braid half undone, and behind her he could see Thomas and Maddie setting the table while the twins chased each other in circles, and Elsie watched from the safety of a chair. Noah sat by the fire, whittling something from a piece of scrap wood. It looked like chaos. It looked like life. "You came back," Rowan said, and there was something raw in her voice, something that sounded like relief mixed with disbelief. "I said I would." "People say a lot of things." Caleb stepped inside and closed the door behind him, shutting out the cold. "I'm not people, Rowan. I'm the man who's keeping this promise." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Sharp and decisive, like she'd made some internal calculation and arrived at an answer she could live with. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. "Thomas shot a rabbit this afternoon. We made stew. Smells good." "It's probably terrible," she replied, but there was the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. They ate together around the table, 8 people crowded into a space that had held only silence for months. The stew was actually good, better than Caleb had managed in weeks, and he said so. Maddie beamed. Thomas tried to look nonchalant and failed. Even Noah's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. After the meal, Caleb told them about the courthouse, about the petition and the hearing and Kincaid's competing claim. He didn't sugarcoat it. These children had survived too much to be patronized with gentle lies. "He wants to split us up," Rowan said when he finished. It wasn't a question. "He wants the boys, says he can provide better opportunities." "What he wants is workers he doesn't have to pay," Thomas said bitterly. "I heard the stories about his operation. Boys disappear into his logging camps and come out broken, if they come out at all." "That's not going to happen," Caleb said. "How do you know?" Maddie asked, her voice small. "How do you know the judge won't give us to him anyway?" "Because I'm going to prove that you're better off here, that you're safe and cared for, and—" He paused, searching for the right words. "That you're home." Elsie slipped off her chair and crossed to where Caleb sat. She climbed into his lap without asking permission, her small body radiating warmth and trust, and pressed her face against his chest. The room went very quiet. Caleb's arms came up automatically, awkwardly, to hold her. He couldn't remember the last time he'd held a child. Couldn't remember the last time anyone had trusted him enough to seek comfort from him without fear or calculation. "We're not going back," Elsie whispered into his shirt. "We're not." "No, sweetheart," Caleb said, his voice rough. "You're not." When he looked up, every child in the room was watching him, measuring, hoping, terrified to hope. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "All of you. I don't know what's going to happen in court. I don't know if the judge will rule in my favor or if Kincaid's money will buy him what he wants. But I know this. I will fight for you, every single one of you, and if the law fails, we'll find another way. I won't let you be separated. I won't let you be hurt. That's not a promise I'm making lightly, and it's not one I'll break." "Even if it costs you everything?" Rowan asked. "Yes." "Why?" The word burst from her like it had been burning inside her for weeks. "Why would you do that for us? We're nothing. We're nobody. We're just—" "You're 7 children who deserved better," Caleb interrupted, his voice firm. "And maybe the world failed you. Maybe every adult you've ever known failed you, but I'm not going to, not if I can help it." Rowan's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. "You don't know us. You don't know what we've done, what we've been through. Then tell me." The silence that followed was absolute. Caleb waited. Finally, Thomas spoke. "I stole food. From the orphanage. They beat me for it, but I kept doing it because the little ones were hungry and they wouldn't feed us enough. That's why my tag said troublemaker." Maddie's hand went to her neck, tracing the burn scar. "I started the fire that killed my parents. I knocked over a lamp. I was 6, and I was stupid, and they died because of me." The twins looked at each other, then spoke in their strange half-sentences. "We ran away. From 3 families. Because they separated us. And we won't be apart." Noah said nothing, but his hands stilled on the wood he'd been carving, and his eyes grew distant. Rowan took a shaky breath. "I killed a man." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. He worked at one of the houses they placed me in, she continued, her voice flat and mechanical. He came into my room at night, said I was getting old enough to be useful in other ways. I had a knife. I always kept a knife. And when he tried to, I stabbed him. He didn't die right away, but he died. They found him in the morning, and I ran before they could arrest me. That's why I was on the train. That's why my tag said defective. Because I'm a murderer. Caleb looked at this girl, this fierce, terrified, broken girl, and felt something crack open in his chest. You're not a murderer, Rowan, he said quietly. You're a survivor. The law doesn't care about the difference. I do. He met her eyes. You protected yourself from a predator. That's not murder. That's self-defense. And if anyone tries to tell you different, they'll have to go through me first. Her breath hitched. All of you, Caleb said, looking around the table. Whatever you've done, whatever you've survived, it doesn't change what you are. You're children. You deserve safety and kindness and the chance to grow up without fear. And I don't care what it takes or what it costs. You're going to have that chance. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Elsie tightened her arms around his neck, and Maddie started crying, quiet, shaking sobs that she tried to muffle with her hands. Thomas turned away, his shoulders hunched. The twins grabbed each other's hands. Noah set down his carving and came to stand beside Caleb's chair, his small hand resting on Caleb's shoulder. And Rowan, who'd been carrying the weight of 6 other lives on her 14-year-old shoulders for God knew how long, finally let herself cry. Not the silent tears she'd been fighting, but great gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Caleb stood, still holding Elsie, and crossed to where Rowan stood. He put his free arm around her shoulders and pulled her in. It's all right, he said quietly. You're safe now. I've got you. And for the first time since the train platform, Rowan let herself believe it might be true. Later that night, after the children had gone upstairs and the house had settled into quiet, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with the law book open in front of him. He read about custody statutes and guardian requirements and the legal precedents for challenging wealthy petitioners. The words blurred together after a while, but he kept reading. He had 3 weeks to build a case. 3 weeks to prove that love mattered more than money. 3 weeks to show that family wasn't about blood or resources or social standing. It was about showing up every single day and choosing to stay. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow. And upstairs, 7 children slept under his roof, trusting him to keep the promises he'd made. Caleb turned the page and kept reading. The inspection notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous courier who wouldn't meet Caleb's eyes. The official seal of the territorial court pressed into red wax felt like a brand, and the formal language inside made Caleb's jaw tighten with every line he read. A representative from the Children's Aid Society would be arriving in 4 days to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the Hart residence and its suitability for housing 7 minor children. The evaluation would include private interviews with each child, inspection of living conditions, and assessment of the guardian's character and financial stability. 4 days. Caleb set the letter down on the kitchen table where Rowan was kneading bread dough with fierce concentration. She looked up at the sound of paper hitting wood, read his expression, and went very still. They're coming, she said. Not a question. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. Her hands pressed into the dough hard enough to leave deep impressions. To take us away. To evaluate the situation, Caleb corrected, though the distinction felt thin as tissue paper. To make sure you're being properly cared for. And if they decide we're not? Thomas appeared in the doorway, his arms full of firewood. He must have been listening from the mudroom. If they decide Kincaid's mansion and his money make him a better choice, then I appeal their decision and we keep fighting. You can't fight the whole system, Rowan said quietly, her eyes fixed on the dough beneath her hands. We've tried. It doesn't work. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Thomas to do the same. When the boy had set down his load and joined them at the table, Caleb leaned forward with his elbows on the scarred wood. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice calm and deliberate. In 4 days, a woman is going to come here and look at everything, the house, the food, the sleeping arrangements, all of it. She's going to ask you questions, probably alone, probably designed to trip you up or catch inconsistencies. She's going to be looking for reasons to doubt me, because that's her job, to protect you by questioning everything. So we lie, Thomas said flatly. Tell her what she wants to hear. No, Caleb's voice was firm. You tell her the truth, every bit of it. If she asks if I've ever hit you, you say no because I haven't. If she asks if you're warm and fed and safe, you say yes because you are. If she asks if you want to stay here, you tell her exactly how you feel. No lies, no performance, just truth. Rowan looked up sharply. And if the truth isn't good enough? Then it was never about the truth in the first place, Caleb said. But I'd rather lose honestly than win by turning you into liars. You've had to pretend and perform and say whatever you thought people wanted to hear for too long already. Not here, not in this house. The silence that followed was broken by small footsteps on the stairs. Elsie appeared, still in her nightgown, her blonde hair a tangled halo around her sleep-soft face. She padded straight to Caleb and climbed into his lap without preamble, as had become her habit over the past weeks. Bad dream? He asked gently. She nodded against his chest. Want to talk about it? She shook her head. All right, you just sit here as long as you need to. Rowan watched this exchange with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. Something caught between longing and fear, like she wanted to believe in this gentleness, but couldn't quite let herself trust it. We need to prepare, she said finally. The house needs to be spotless. The children need decent clothes. We need to keep living like we've been living, Caleb interrupted. This isn't a show. It's our life. If it's not good enough as it is, then all the scrubbing and staging in the world won't change that. You don't understand. Rowan's voice rose slightly, panic threading through it. These people look for any excuse. A stain on a floor, a torn dress, one wrong answer. It's all they need to decide we're better off somewhere else. Somewhere with money and servants and no one who gives a damn about you as people, Caleb finished quietly. I know what they look for, Rowan. I also know that we can't win by pretending to be something we're not. We're a working ranch with 7 kids and one man trying to figure out how to make it work. That's the truth. If the truth isn't good enough, then the system's already broken. Thomas was watching Caleb with an expression too old for his 10 years. You really believe that? That honesty matters more than appearances? I believe that the minute we start lying is the minute we prove Kincaid right. That this is just sentiment and wishful thinking instead of something real and worth fighting for. The boy considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, truth it is, but I'm still cleaning my room. Despite everything, Caleb smiled. Fair enough. The next 3 days passed in a strange tension between normalcy and preparation. The children went about their chores with perhaps more diligence than usual, but Caleb noticed other things too, the way Maddie hummed while she worked, how the twins had started finishing each other's sentences with Caleb too, instead of just with each other, the way Noah shadowed him from task to task with silent devotion. These weren't performances. They were the small, genuine markers of children beginning to feel safe. On Wednesday evening, Caleb sat down with each child individually, not to coach them or rehearse answers, but simply to talk, to listen, to give them the chance to ask questions or voice fears without an audience. Maddie came first, perching on the edge of the chair across from him with her hands folded in her lap and her burn scar visible in the lamplight. I don't want to go somewhere else, she said without preamble. Even if it's nicer, even if they have pretty dresses and big houses, I want to stay here. Why? Caleb asked gently. Not because I doubt you. I just want to understand. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the pattern on her skirt. Because you don't look at me like I'm broken. Everyone else sees this. She touched her scar. And they see something ruined, something that needs fixing or hiding or pitying, but you just see me. Maddie, that's all. Something twisted in Caleb's chest. You're not broken, sweetheart. You're scarred. There's a difference. Scars just mean you survived something that tried to destroy you. That's what I'll tell the lady, Maddie said, her chin lifting. If she asks why I want to stay, I'll tell her you taught me that. The twins came together as they did everything, sprawling on the floor near the fire, while Caleb sat in the armchair Sarah used to occupy. They spoke in their overlapping way, one starting where the other left off. "We won't," Jonah began. "Be separated," Micah finished, "no matter what they promise. We've run away before, and we'll do it again. If they try to split us up." Caleb leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I'm not going to let them split you up. That's a promise." "People promise things," Jonah said, "and then break them," Micah concluded. "I know, but I'm not people. I'm Caleb. And when I make a promise, I keep it." He paused, then added, "If the lady asks you tomorrow if you want to stay together, what are you going to tell her?" The twins looked at each other in that eerie, silent communication they shared, then back at him. This time they spoke in unison. "We're a package deal." Thomas came after the twins had gone upstairs, carrying himself with the stiff-backed pride of a boy trying to be a man before his time. He sat across from Caleb and met his eyes directly. "I need to know something," Thomas said, "and I need the truth, not what you think I want to hear." "All right. If they rule against you, if the judge says we have to go to Kincaid or back to the society, what are you really going to do? Are you going to fight, or are you going to let us go because it's easier than bucking the system?" The question was a knife, sharp and precise, and aimed at the heart of everything. "I'm going to fight," Caleb said steadily. "Every legal option I have, I'll use. And if those run out, I'll find new ones. I'll appeal to the territorial governor if I have to. I'll take it to federal court. I'll make so much noise that they can't ignore what's happening here. And if that's not enough?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. "Then I'll help you run. All of you. I'll give you money and supplies and a head start, and I'll lie to every official who comes asking where you went. Because I'd rather see you free and fighting than safe and broken." Thomas's eyes widened. "You'd do that? Risk everything? Your ranch, your freedom, maybe even your life, just to help us escape?" "Without hesitation." "Why?" "Because some things matter more than playing by rules that are designed to keep people in their place," Caleb said quietly. "And because I meant what I said that first night. You're not going back, not if I have anything to say about it." For the first time since Caleb had known him, Thomas's careful mask cracked. His eyes went bright with unshed tears, and his voice came out rough. "No one's ever... people say things, but they don't..." "I know," Caleb said, "but I do." Thomas nodded once, sharp and decisive, then stood and headed for the stairs. He paused at the bottom, his hand on the rail. "Mr. Hart?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for meaning it." After Thomas had gone, Caleb sat alone in the quiet house and let himself feel the weight of what he'd promised. He wasn't naive. He knew that running would mean losing everything he'd built here, the ranch, his standing in the community, possibly his freedom if they caught him. But when he measured that against the thought of those 7 children being scattered to the winds or handed over to a man who saw them as commodities, there was no question which he'd choose. He'd lost one family already. He wasn't losing another. Thursday morning dawned clear and cold, the sun rising over the mountains like a promise or a threat depending on how you looked at it. Caleb was up before dawn, stoking fires and making coffee, and trying not to let his nerves show. The children appeared one by one, dressed in their best clothes, which weren't particularly impressive, but were clean and mended, and gathered around the breakfast table in silence. Even Elsie was quiet, pressed against Rowan's side with her thumb in her mouth. "Remember," Caleb said as they ate, "just tell the truth. Don't embellish. Don't minimize. Just say what is." "And if she asks about before?" Rowan's voice was tight. "About what we told you the other night?" "Then you decide what you're comfortable sharing. Your past is yours. You don't owe anyone your trauma as proof that you deserve safety." At precisely 9 o'clock, a black carriage pulled into the yard. The woman who emerged was tall and thin, dressed in severe gray wool, with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried a leather case and wore an expression of professional neutrality that somehow managed to convey judgment anyway. Caleb met her at the door, Rowan standing just behind him like a sentinel. "Mrs. Eleanor Ashford," the woman said, offering a gloved hand, "Children's Aid Society. I'm here to conduct the court-ordered evaluation. Caleb Hart, please, come in." She swept into the house with the air of someone conducting an inspection rather than a visit, her sharp eyes cataloging everything: the worn but clean floors, the fire burning steadily in the hearth, the breakfast dishes still on the table, the children arranged in a nervous cluster near the stairs. 7 children, she said, pulling a notebook from her case. Rowan Hale, Thomas Brennan, Matilda Fletcher, Jonah and Micah Davis, Noah Sterling, and Elsie. She paused, frowning. The youngest surname is listed as unknown. We're working on confirming her family records, Caleb said. But yes, those are their names. Mrs. Ashford's pen scratched across paper. I'll need to see their sleeping arrangements, the kitchen facilities, bathing facilities, and then conduct private interviews with each child. I'll also require documentation of their education, medical care, and daily schedule. Of course. Would you like to start upstairs? For the next hour, Caleb led Mrs. Ashford through every room of the house while the children waited in tense silence below. She examined the bedrooms with a critical eye, noted the shared spaces, checked the cleanliness of the washroom, and inspected the kitchen with the thoroughness of someone searching for violations. She asked pointed questions about finances, about Caleb's plans for their education, about his experience with children. He answered everything honestly, even when honesty made him look unprepared or insufficient. Yes, he'd never raised children before. No, he didn't have formal teaching credentials. Yes, the ranch was his sole source of income, and it was modest at best. No, he didn't have family nearby to help. Yes, he was doing this alone. Finally, she set down her pen and looked at him directly. Mr. Hart, I must ask, why? You're a widower with no children of your own, no experience in child care, no particular resources. Why take on the burden of 7 orphans when you could have simply walked away? Caleb met her gaze steadily. Because they're not a burden. They're children who needed someone to choose them for once instead of treating them like problems to be solved. And I'd rather try and fail to give them a real home than succeed at walking away. Something flickered in Mrs. Ashford's expression. Too quick to name, but there nonetheless. I'll need to interview the children now, she said, privately, starting with the oldest. Rowan's interview lasted nearly 30 minutes. Caleb could hear the murmur of voices from the parlor, but not the words, and the waiting felt like torture. When Rowan finally emerged, her face was pale but composed, and she went straight upstairs without looking at anyone. Thomas went next, then Maddie, then the twins together after Mrs. Ashford accepted that separating them would defeat the purpose of honest answers. Each interview stretched longer than seemed necessary, and with each one, the tension in the house wound tighter. Noah's turn came, and Caleb saw the panic flash across the boy's face. He doesn't speak, Caleb said quietly to Mrs. Ashford. Hasn't in 2 years, but he understands everything, and he can communicate other ways if you're patient. I see. Mrs. Ashford's expression was unreadable. That will present certain challenges for evaluation. He can write, Thomas offered suddenly from the stairs. Not a lot, but some words, and he draws. He's good at drawing. Mrs. Ashford considered this, then nodded. Very well. Fetch me paper and a pencil. Noah's interview was the shortest, and when he came out, he went straight to Caleb and pressed against his side. Caleb's hand came down on the boy's shoulder automatically, a gesture of protection and reassurance that had become second nature over the past weeks. Finally, only Elsie remained. The little girl had fallen asleep in Rowan's lap during the wait, and she woke confused and frightened when Mrs. Ashford called her name. I want Caleb, she said immediately, her voice small and scared. The interview must be private, Mrs. Ashford said, not unkindly but firmly. I want Caleb, Elsie repeated, louder this time, her eyes filling with tears. Caleb knelt beside Rowan's chair. Hey, sweetheart, it's all right. Mrs. Ashford just wants to talk to you for a few minutes. Just talking, that's all. Will you come back? Elsie asked, and the question hit Caleb like a physical blow, because it wasn't really about the interview. It was about every time an adult had left her and never returned. I'm not going anywhere, he said softly. I'll be right here in this room when you're done. I promise. Elsie searched his face, then nodded and slipped down from Rowan's lap. She took Mrs. Ashford's offered hand and walked into the parlor, looking back twice to make sure Caleb hadn't disappeared. The minutes crawled past. Caleb stood at the window watching snow begin to fall in lazy spirals and tried not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. When the parlor door finally opened, Elsie ran out and launched herself at Caleb with enough force to nearly knock him over. He caught her automatically, lifting her into his arms, and felt her small body shaking. "You came back," she whispered fiercely. "You came back." "Always," he said. "Always, Elsie." Mrs. Ashford emerged from the parlor, her expression carefully neutral. She gathered her papers and her case with methodical precision, and Caleb's stomach dropped because he couldn't read her at all. "Mr. Hart," she said finally, "I've completed my evaluation. I'll be submitting my report to Judge Whitmore within 48 hours. The court will schedule a hearing once all parties have been properly notified." "And your recommendation?" Caleb asked, even though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. She paused at the door, her hand on the frame, and for the first time since she'd arrived, something human crossed her face. "My recommendation," she said slowly, "will be based on what I believe serves the children's best interests. Good day, Mr. Hart." Then she was gone, her carriage disappearing down the snow-dusted road, and Caleb was left standing in his house with 7 children and no idea whether he'd just won or lost everything. That night, no one wanted to eat. The children pushed food around their plates in silence, and even Rowan's usual fierce determination seemed dimmed. Finally, Caleb set down his fork and looked around the table. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "you need to know something. These past few weeks, they've mattered. To me. You've brought life back into this house, and into me, and I don't regret a single moment of it. No matter what some judge decides, that's real. What we've built here is real." "But real doesn't always win," Rowan said, her voice hollow. "No," Caleb admitted. "It doesn't, but it's still worth fighting for." The hearing notice arrived Friday morning, 10 o'clock Monday, Territorial Courthouse, Judge Marcus Whitmore presiding. Both petitioners required to attend, children to remain in temporary custody of current guardian pending ruling. 4 days. 4 days to prepare for a fight he might not be able to win, to marshal whatever arguments and evidence he could gather, to find the words that would convince a judge that family was more than financial statements and social standing. Caleb rode into town that afternoon to speak with Deputy John Mitchell, one of the few men in Red Willow Crossing he trusted completely. Mitchell had served with him years ago, knew his character, knew his capabilities. He agreed immediately to provide a written reference and testify if needed. "Kincaid's been making the rounds too," Mitchell said as they stood outside the sheriff's office, "offering generous donations to the church building fund, the school, the Widows Relief Society, making himself look like a pillar of the community." "Of course he is," Caleb said bitterly. "But here's the thing, people remember what happened at the train station. They remember him hitting that girl. And a lot of folks in this valley don't much care for the way Kincaid does business. You've got more support than you think." "Support doesn't always translate to courtroom victories." "No," Mitchell agreed, "but it means you're not fighting alone." Over the weekend, 3 more ranchers and the school teacher sent letters of support. The local pastor, despite Kincaid's generous donation, wrote a measured statement about Caleb's character and the visible improvement in the children's welfare since their placement. It wasn't much, but it was something. Monday morning arrived too fast and too slow simultaneously. Caleb dressed in his best clothes, still worn, still modest, but clean and pressed, and tried to project a confidence he didn't feel. The children gathered in the kitchen, pale and silent. "You're not coming," he said gently. "I know you want to, but the hearing is just for the adults. You stay here with Rowan, she's in charge, until I get back." "And if you don't come back?" Thomas asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Then Deputy Mitchell will come instead, and he'll explain what happens next. But I will come back, Thomas. One way or another, I will come back." The ride to town felt like riding toward an execution. The courthouse was already busy when Caleb arrived, and Vernon Kincaid's carriage stood at the front steps like a monument to wealth and power. Caleb tied his horse and climbed the stairs with his shoulders straight and his jaw set. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, with windows that let in cold winter light. Judge Whitmore sat behind an elevated desk, a gray-bearded man with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that demanded attention without seeking it. Mrs. Ashford sat near the front, her case open, and her expression unreadable. Vernon Kincaid occupied the opposite side with a lawyer in an expensive suit. Caleb took his seat and tried to slow his racing heart. We're here to consider competing petitions for guardianship of 7 minor children currently in the temporary custody of Caleb Hart, Judge Whitmore began, his voice carrying easily through the small space. I've reviewed both petitions and the evaluation report from Mrs. Ashford. Mr. Kincaid, your counsel may present your case first. The lawyer stood smooth and practiced and began laying out Kincaid's qualifications. Substantial wealth, established household with staff to provide proper care, educational opportunities through private tutors, connections that could secure the children's futures, character references from prominent citizens. It was a masterclass in presenting appearances as reality. Then it was Caleb's turn, and he had no lawyer, no prepared speech, just the truth and the desperate hope that it would be enough. He stood, cleared his throat, and began to speak. Your Honor, Caleb began, and his voice sounded steadier than he felt. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I can offer what Mr. Kincaid can offer in terms of money or social connections. I can't. My ranch is modest, my income is uncertain, and I have no staff except my own 2 hands and whatever help the children themselves can provide. On paper, I look like the worst choice. I understand that. He paused, meeting Judge Whitmore's eyes directly. But those 7 children aren't numbers on paper. They're Rowan, who's been protecting her pack since before she had any right to carry that weight. They're Thomas, who's smart as a whip and loyal to his bones. They're Maddie, who hums while she works and is learning she doesn't have to hide her scars. They're Jonah and Micah, who speak in halves and make a whole and won't be separated no matter what anyone promises them. They're Noah, who hasn't spoken in 2 years but communicates more with his silence than most people do with 1,000 words. And they're Elsie, who's 5 years old and has already learned that adults leave and don't come back. Caleb's hands gripped the edge of the table in front of him. These children have been labeled and categorized and judged their entire lives. Troublemaker, defective, wild, strange, mute, unknown. Those were the tags pinned to their chests when they arrived here, like their worth could be summed up in a single word. And maybe Mr. Kincaid can give them fine clothes and fancy educations and all the material advantages money can buy. But I can give them something he can't. I can give them a home where they're seen as people, not potential, and where they're wanted for who they are, not what they might become. Kincaid's lawyer started to object, but Judge Whitmore raised a hand. Let him finish. Caleb took a breath. I won't lie to this court. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. I'm learning as I go, making mistakes, trying to figure out how to be what they need. But I show up every day. I keep my promises. And when they're scared or hurt or just need someone to be there, I'm there. That's all I can offer. Consistency, safety, and the certainty that they matter. Not because they're useful or profitable or socially advantageous, but because they're human beings who deserve to be cherished. He sat down, his heart hammering against his ribs, and waited. Judge Whitmore was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Then he turned to Mrs. Ashford. Your evaluation, if you please. The woman stood, opened her case with practiced efficiency, and pulled out a sheaf of papers. Her voice when she spoke was measured and professional, but Caleb thought he detected something beneath it, something almost like approval, though he didn't dare hope. I conducted extensive interviews with all 7 children, as well as a thorough inspection of the Hart residence, she began. I evaluated sleeping arrangements, nutrition, educational provisions, and emotional well-being. I also questioned each child privately about their treatment, their fears, and their preferences regarding placement. She paused, glancing down at her notes. The children are adequately housed in clean, warm accommodations. Meals are nutritious if simple, and there is sufficient food stores for the winter months. The older children are receiving informal education from Mr. Hart, supplemented by books from his personal library, with plans to enroll them in the territorial school come spring. Medical needs are being addressed. I verified this with Dr. Patterson in town, who confirmed he's treated minor ailments at the Hart Ranch without compensation, which Mr. Hart has committed to repaying when able. Kincaid's lawyer looked smug, no doubt preparing to pounce on the word informal and the phrase without compensation. But Mrs. Ashford wasn't finished. More significantly, I observed the emotional state of the children. All 7 demonstrated clear attachment to Mr. Hart and to each other. They function as a cohesive family unit with established routines, shared responsibilities, and mutual support. When asked about their preferences, every single child, including those too young to fully comprehend the legal implications, expressed a desire to remain with Mr. Hart. She set down her papers and looked directly at the judge. I have conducted hundreds of these evaluations over 15 years with the Children's Aid Society. I have seen placements that looked perfect on paper turn out to be nightmares, and I have seen unlikely arrangements flourish into genuine homes. In my professional opinion, the Hart placement falls into the latter category. These children are thriving, not despite Mr. Hart's limitations, but because of his commitment to their well-being as individuals, rather than as commodities or charity cases. The courtroom went very quiet. Kincaid's lawyer recovered first, standing with a smooth smile. Mrs. Ashford, isn't it true that emotional attachment is not the sole criteria for determining appropriate placement? That material security, educational opportunity, and social advantage must also be considered? Of course, Mrs. Ashford replied coolly, which is why I also evaluated Mr. Kincaid's proposed placement. The lawyer's smile faltered. I beg your pardon? You submitted a petition for custody of 4 of the 7 children, specifically the boys. As part of my duties, I visited the Kincaid estate to assess its suitability. She pulled out another set of papers. The physical accommodations are indeed superior. The educational resources are extensive. The household staff is well-trained and professional. Kincaid leaned back with a satisfied expression. However, Mrs. Ashford continued, and the single word cut through the courtroom like a blade, I have serious concerns about the proposed arrangement. First, the petition seeks to separate siblings and children who have formed familial bonds, which I strongly advise against, except in cases of abuse or severe incompatibility. Second, when I interviewed Mr. Kincaid's existing household staff, I learned that his previous arrangements with young workers have ended in several unexplained departures and at least 2 formal complaints to the Territorial Labor Office, though charges were never filed. Kincaid's face darkened. Those were disgruntled employees making false accusations. Mr. Kincaid, you'll have your opportunity to respond, Judge Whitmore said sharply, then turned back to Mrs. Ashford. Continue. Third and most concerning, when I asked Mr. Kincaid directly about his motivations for seeking custody, he spoke primarily about the boys' potential labor value and his desire to train them for positions in his various enterprises. While there is nothing inherently wrong with teaching children useful skills, the tenor of the conversation suggested he views them more as future employees than as children in need of care and nurturing. Oh, that's a gross mischaracterization of my intentions. Kincaid started to rise, but his lawyer pulled him back down. Mrs. Ashford's expression didn't change. I can only report what I observed and what was said to me, Mr. Kincaid. And what I observed was a man interested in acquiring workers, not in providing a home. Judge Whitmore made a note on the papers before him, his face grave. Your recommendation, Mrs. Ashford? I recommend that guardianship be granted to Caleb Hart for all 7 children, with the court retaining oversight for a period of 6 months to ensure continued stability. I further recommend that Mr. Kincaid's petition be denied in its entirety. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Kincaid shot to his feet. This is outrageous. I have significant resources, standing in this community, the ability to provide those children with opportunities they could never access on a failing ranch with an uneducated widower. Sit down, Mr. Kincaid, Judge Whitmore said, his voice like iron wrapped in silk. You'll have your chance to present additional evidence if you have it. But I'll remind you that this court is concerned with the welfare of children, not with your business interests or social standing. Kincaid's lawyer put a restraining hand on his client's arm and whispered urgently in his ear. Kincaid remained standing for another moment, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, before finally sitting down with enough force to make his chair scrape loudly against the floor. Does the petitioner Kincaid have additional evidence to present? Judge Whitmore asked. The lawyer stood again, his composure somewhat rattled. Your Honor, we have character references from several prominent citizens attesting to Mr. Kincaid's generosity and civic responsibility. We also have financial statements demonstrating his ability to provide. I've reviewed those materials, the judge interrupted. They speak to Mr. Kincaid's wealth and social position. They do not speak to his suitability as a guardian for children who have already experienced significant trauma and instability. With respect, Your Honor, Mr. Hart is a single man with no experience raising children, living on an isolated ranch with minimal income and no family support. How can that possibly be considered a superior placement to, because those children chose him, Judge Whitmore said quietly. All 7 of them, according to Mrs. Ashford's report. And in my experience, children are often better judges of character than adults give them credit for. He looked down at the papers before him, then back up at the courtroom. I'm prepared to make a ruling, but first I want to hear from Mr. Hart on one specific matter. Mr. Hart, stand please. Caleb rose, his legs unsteady beneath him. You've taken in 7 children with virtually no preparation, no experience, and limited resources. You're asking this court to grant you permanent guardianship of all of them, which means you'll be responsible for their care, their education, their welfare, and their futures until they reach adulthood. That could be 13 years for the youngest. Are you prepared for that commitment? Do you understand what you're actually asking for? Caleb met the judge's eyes. Your Honor, 4 months ago I buried my wife. For weeks after, I couldn't see any reason to keep going. The ranch felt like a tomb, and I felt like a ghost haunting it. Then I rode into town and found 7 children standing on a train platform with paper tags naming all the ways they'd been judged and found wanting. And I saw a man who had everything treat them like property he could purchase. His voice grew stronger. I didn't plan to take them in. I didn't wake up that morning thinking I was going to become a guardian to 7 orphans, but I couldn't walk away. And over these past weeks, they've given me something I didn't even know I'd lost. A reason to get up in the morning. A reason to fix the fence and plan for spring and think about the future instead of just surviving the present. So yes, Your Honor, I understand what I'm asking for. I'm asking for the privilege of raising 7 remarkable children who deserve someone to fight for them. And I'm prepared to do that for as long as they need me. Judge Whitmore studied him for a long moment, then looked at Kincaid. Mr. Kincaid, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I expect a direct answer. Why do you want custody of these specific children? Kincaid stood, smoothing his vest with obvious effort to regain his composure. Because I believe I can provide them with opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. A proper education, training in useful trades, exposure to society and culture. You didn't answer my question, the judge said. I asked why you want these specific children. Not what you can provide, but why you're interested in them in particular. Kincaid's jaw worked. They're orphans in need of placement. I have the means to help them. I don't understand what you're asking. I'm asking if you see them as individuals with names and personalities and preferences, or as interchangeable laborers for your enterprises. I'm asking if you care about Rowan's fierce protectiveness, or Thomas's intelligence, or Elsie's need for security, or if you just see bodies that can be put to work. The silence that followed was damning. Finally, Kincaid said, I see children who need structure and discipline and the kind of training that will make them productive members of society. I see, Judge Whitmore said softly. Mr. Hart, do you have anything to add? Caleb thought about everything he wanted to say, about Rowan's knife under her pillow, and Thomas's questions about honesty, and Maddie's humming, and the twins' joined hands, and Noah's silent shadow, and Elsie's desperate need to know he'd come back. About the way they'd brought his house back to life and taught him that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about showing up every day and choosing to stay. But in the end, he said simply, I love them, Your Honor. All 7 of them. That's the only qualification that matters to me. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly, then picked up his gavel. I've heard enough. This court finds that the best interests of the 7 minor children in question are served by placement with Caleb Hart. Guardianship is hereby granted, subject to court oversight for a period of 6 months. Mr. Kincaid's petition is denied. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. For a moment, Caleb couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he'd just heard. Then Deputy Mitchell was clapping him on the shoulder, and Mrs. Ashford was offering a rare smile, and the judge was gathering his papers and leaving the bench while Kincaid stood frozen in place, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. This isn't over, Kincaid said, his voice low and dangerous. I have resources, connections. I can appeal this decision. I can make your life hell, Hart. Caleb turned to face him, and something in his expression made Kincaid take an involuntary step back. You can try, Caleb said quietly. But those children are under my protection now, legally and officially. And if you come near them again, if you so much as look at them wrong, I will make sure every person in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. The kind who hits children and sees orphans as unpaid labor and hides behind wealth and respectability while being rotten underneath. You want to fight me in court? Fine. But you'll be fighting in the light of day now, where everyone can see. Kincaid's face went red, then white. Without another word, he turned and strode from the courtroom, his lawyer scrambling to follow. Caleb stood there in the sudden quiet, feeling like he'd just survived a battle he hadn't been sure he could win. You did well, Mrs. Ashford said, approaching with her case in hand. Those children are fortunate to have found you. I'm the fortunate one, Caleb replied. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Perhaps. But fortune favors those who deserve it, Mr. Hart. I'll be checking in periodically over the next 6 months. I expect to find those children continuing to thrive. They will, Caleb promised. I'll make sure of it. After she left, Deputy Mitchell walked Caleb to his horse. Kincaid's not going to let this go easy, Mitchell warned. He's got pride and money and a mean streak. Watch your back. I will. But John, thank you. For the reference, for being here, for all of it. Mitchell clasped his hand. Those kids needed someone to stand for them. Glad it was you. The ride back to the ranch felt surreal, like Caleb was moving through a dream. The winter sun was high and bright, turning the snow-covered valley into a landscape of white and gold, and the familiar outline of his house in the distance looked different somehow, more solid, more real, more like a home than a monument to loss. As he approached, he could see movement in the yard. The children must have been watching for him, because they came spilling out of the house like water breaking through a dam, all 7 of them, with Rowan in the lead and Elsie bringing up the rear. Caleb dismounted, and before he could say anything, Rowan reached him. Well, she demanded, her face pale and her eyes too bright. What happened? We won, Caleb said, and his voice broke on the words. The judge granted guardianship. You're staying, all of you. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Rowan made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and threw her arms around him with enough force to nearly knock him over. Thomas was right behind her, then Maddie, then the twins, and suddenly Caleb was surrounded by children, all of them talking at once, crying and laughing and holding on to him like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Elsie wormed her way through the tangle of bodies and looked up at him with enormous eyes. We're staying? Forever? Caleb knelt down so he was at her level. Forever, sweetheart. This is your home now. Legal and official and permanent. She considered this, then launched herself at him with a fierce hug that squeezed the air from his lungs. Noah stood slightly apart from the group, his dark eyes shining with tears he wouldn't let fall. Caleb reached out a hand, and the boy took it, letting himself be pulled into the embrace. They stood there in the yard for a long time, 8 people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other on purpose, bound now not just by circumstance, but by law and by love. Finally, they disentangled and headed inside, where the fire was warm and the kitchen smelled like bread and the table was set for 8. That evening, after dinner had been eaten and dishes washed and the younger children had gone upstairs, Caleb sat with Rowan and Thomas at the kitchen table. The guardianship papers were spread before them, official, stamped, real. There's something I need to tell you both, Caleb said quietly. About Elsie. Rowan looked up sharply. What about her? Mrs. Ashford did some digging into her records. Turns out her mother's maiden name was Whitfield. Sarah, my wife. Sarah's sister married a Whitfield. They moved east before the war, and we lost touch. He paused, the words catching in his throat. Elsie's my wife's niece. Blood family. Thomas's eyes widened. Does that mean... It means she's connected to me by more than just circumstance, Caleb said. But it doesn't change anything. You're all family now. All of you. Blood doesn't make you more or less mine than the rest of them." Rowan was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You could have used that in court. Told the judge you had a blood claim to at least one of us. It might have made the difference." "Maybe. But I didn't want to win because of blood. I wanted to win because this, all of us together, is the right thing, the true thing." She nodded slowly, something easing in her face. "Thank you for not separating us, for not playing that card." "You're a package deal," Caleb said, echoing the twins' words back to her. "That was the promise." "That's what I'm keeping." Late that night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Caleb stood at his bedroom window and looked out at the moonlit valley. The house was quiet above him, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The peaceful silence of sleeping children safe in their beds, not the hollow emptiness of abandonment. He thought about Sarah and what she would have made of all this. She'd always wanted children, had grieved each pregnancy that didn't take, had slowly accepted that it wasn't going to happen for them. And now here he was, guardian to 7. "I hope I'm doing this right," he whispered to her memory. "I hope you'd be proud." The wind answered, soft through the pines, and Caleb chose to hear agreement in it. But even as he stood there, savoring the victory, a cold unease settled in his gut. Because he knew Vernon Kincaid, knew men like him. They didn't accept defeat gracefully. They regrouped, plotted, found new angles of attack. The legal battle might be won, but the war wasn't over. Sure enough, 2 days later, Deputy Mitchell rode out to the ranch with news that made Caleb's blood run cold. "Kincaid filed an emergency motion with the territorial marshal," Mitchell said, his face grim. "He's claiming that Noah Sterling is wanted for murder in New York, that he witnessed a killing 3 years ago and fled before he could testify. Says the boy's real name is Noah Patterson, and there's an outstanding warrant for his apprehension as a material witness." Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him. "That's impossible. Noah's 7 years old. He was 4 when—" "I know," Mitchell cut in. "But Kincaid's got paperwork, court documents from New York, witness statements, the whole works. I don't know if it's real or forged, but it looks official enough that Marshal Drummond is obligated to investigate." "When?" "He's riding out here tomorrow morning, and Caleb—" Mitchell's voice dropped. "If those documents check out, he has to take the boy. There's no choice. Witness to a murder means Noah has to go back and testify, and until that's resolved, he can't stay here." Caleb's vision went red at the edges. "Over my dead body." "Don't do anything stupid," Mitchell warned. "If you resist a federal marshal, you'll lose everything. The ranch, the other kids, your freedom. Kincaid's counting on you to make that mistake." "So what do I do? Just hand Noah over? Let them drag a traumatized child back to New York to testify about something that probably destroyed him in the first place?" "You fight it the right way. You get a lawyer, you challenge the warrant's validity, you demand proof. But you do it through legal channels, or Kincaid wins anyway." After Mitchell left, Caleb sat the children down and told them what was coming. Noah went absolutely still, his small body rigid with terror. Rowan's hand went immediately to the knife she still carried, her face hard with defiance. "They're not taking him," she said flatly. "I don't care what papers they have, we run first." "We're not running," Caleb said, though every instinct screamed at him to do exactly that. "We're going to fight this. But I need you to tell me the truth, Noah. All of it. What happened in New York? What did you see?" The boy's eyes were huge and haunted. He shook his head violently, backing away. "Noah," Caleb said gently, kneeling down, "I can't protect you if I don't know what we're fighting. Please, trust me." For a long moment, Noah just stared at him. Then slowly he reached for the paper and pencil that lived on the kitchen table now. His hand shook as he wrote, the letters crude but clear. "Bad man hurt mama. I saw. He said I tell he kill me too." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. "You witnessed your mother's murder," he said quietly, "and the killer threatened you into silence." Noah nodded, tears streaming down his face. "And Kincaid somehow found out about this and is using it to get to you." Another nod. Rowan made a sound like a wounded animal. "They'll make him testify, make him relive it, and if the killer's still out there, then we prove the warrant's a fraud," Caleb said, his voice hard. "Because I'm willing to bet Kincaid fabricated or manipulated evidence to create grounds for Noah's removal. And if that's true, it's a federal crime." He looked at Noah, at this small, silent boy who'd been carrying the weight of witnessed horror for 3 years. "You're not going anywhere," he promised. "I don't care what papers they bring or what threats they make. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow, and somewhere in town, Vernon Kincaid sharpened his knives for the next round. The marshal arrived at first light, accompanied by 2 deputies and a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as a representative from the New York District Attorney's office. Caleb met them in the yard, his body positioned between them and the house where 7 children watched from the windows with fear-bright eyes. Marshal Drummond was a weathered man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too much to be easily fooled. He dismounted slowly, his hand resting on the warrant folded in his coat pocket. "Mr. Hart," he said, his voice neutral, "I assume you know why we're here." "I know what you've been told," Caleb replied carefully. "Doesn't mean it's true. I've got a warrant signed by a New York judge for the apprehension of Noah Patterson, material witness to a homicide that occurred 3 years ago. The paperwork's in order, and I'm obligated to execute it." "The paperwork might look in order," Caleb said, "but I'm betting if you dig deeper, you'll find it's built on lies. This whole thing stinks of Vernon Kincaid's manipulation." The man in the dark suit stepped forward. "Mr. Hart, I'm Assistant District Attorney Leonard Graves. I assure you this investigation is legitimate. We've been searching for Noah Patterson for nearly 3 years. His testimony is crucial to prosecuting his mother's killer." "Then why wait 3 years to find him? He's been in the system since his mother died. He came here on a registered orphan train with documented records. If you really wanted to find him, you could have done it years ago." Graves's expression flickered just for a moment, and Caleb knew he'd hit something true. "The boy was lost in the system," Graves said smoothly. "It happens more often than you'd think. But now we've located him, and the law requires his return to New York for questioning and eventual testimony." "You mean the law requires you to rip a traumatized 7-year-old away from the first stable home he's had since watching his mother murdered, drag him across the country, and force him to relive the worst moment of his life in front of strangers? We understand this is difficult." "You understand nothing," Caleb cut in, his voice hard. "That boy hasn't spoken a word in 3 years because of what he saw. He's been shuffled through institutions and foster homes and labeled defective because he couldn't verbalize his trauma. And now you want to use him as a witness? He's a child, not evidence." Marshal Drummond cleared his throat. "Mr. Hart, I sympathize, but my hands are tied. I have a legal warrant, and I have to execute it. You can make this easy or hard, but the outcome's the same." Caleb's hand moved toward the revolver at his hip, not drawing, just acknowledging its presence. The deputies tensed immediately. "Don't," Drummond said quietly. "Don't throw away everything you've built here. Don't make me arrest you in front of those children. Then don't make me watch you destroy a little boy who's just started to feel safe." The standoff held for a long, terrible moment. Then the door to the house opened and Rowan stepped out onto the porch with Noah's hand clasped firmly in hers. The other children clustered behind her, Thomas with his jaw set, Maddie with tears streaming down her face, the twins holding each other, Elsie clinging to Thomas's shirt. "If you're taking Noah," Rowan said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes, "you're taking all of us. We're a family. You don't get to break us apart." "Miss, this doesn't concern you," Graves started. "Everything that concerns Noah concerns me," Rowan interrupted. "We're his family. He's mine. And if you think I'm letting you drag him away without a fight, you don't know anything about what we've survived to get here." Noah pulled his hand free from Rowan's and walked down the porch steps with a terrible, resigned dignity. He crossed the yard to where Caleb stood and looked up at him with those dark, haunted eyes. Then he did something he hadn't done since the train platform. He spoke. "Not Patterson." The words came out rusty and broken, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. "Sterling. Noah. Sterling." The silence that followed was absolute. Graves recovered first. "Son, I understand you're frightened, but the records clearly show—" "What records?" Deputy Mitchell's voice cut through the moment like a knife. He'd ridden up during the confrontation, and now he dismounted with a leather satchel in his hand. "Because I've been doing some digging of my own, and what I found is real interesting. He pulled out a sheaf of papers and handed them to Marshall Drummond. That warrant you're carrying? It was filed exactly 3 days after Judge Whitmore denied Vernon Kincaid's petition for custody. The witness statements supporting it come from a private investigator on Kincaid's payroll, and the New York court clerk who supposedly verified the records? He's the cousin of Kincaid's business partner. Drummond's face darkened as he read. Where did you get this? Telegraph office, county records, and a friend in the New York Marshal Service who owed me a favor. Mitchell looked at Graves. You want to explain why an assistant district attorney from New York would travel all the way to Wyoming Territory to personally escort a 7-year-old witness when standard procedure is to send a request through local authorities? Graves's composure finally cracked. The case is high profile. You wanted to make sure Kincaid's scheme worked, Mitchell said flatly. How much is he paying you, or is it blackmail? Because a legitimate ADA wouldn't risk his career on a fabricated warrant just for money. This is slander. This is fraud, Mitchell corrected. Federal fraud, using falsified documents to interfere with a lawful guardianship. That's a serious crime, Mr. Graves. And if I'm right, you're looking at disbarment at minimum, prison time at worst. Marshall Drummond looked from the papers to Graves to the boy standing beside Caleb with his small hand gripping the edge of Caleb's coat. Something shifted in his expression. Show me proof, he said to Mitchell. Real proof, not just suspicious timing. Mitchell pulled out another document. This is Noah Sterling's original intake paperwork from the 5 Points Orphanage in New York, dated 3 years ago. Mother's name, Catherine Sterling, died of fever. Father, unknown. No mention of witnessing any crime, no outstanding warrants, no flags in his file except notation that he stopped speaking after his mother's death. He held up another paper. This is the documentation for Noah Patterson, supposedly wanted as a material witness. Mother's name, Catherine Patterson, died of homicide. Same death date as Catherine Sterling, same orphanage, same physical description of the child. Drummond's eyes narrowed. Same boy, 2 different stories. Exactly. Someone, and I'm betting it was Kincaid's investigator, found a convenient murder case with an unsolved witness angle, changed some names and details, and built a fake identity for Noah to justify his removal. The real Noah Patterson probably doesn't exist, or he's some other child entirely. Graves had gone pale. You can't prove that. Actually, I can. Mitchell produced a telegram. This arrived this morning from the New York City Police Department. I wired them asking about the Catherine Patterson homicide case. Want to know what they said? He read aloud. Case closed 14 months ago. Perpetrator convicted and executed. No outstanding witnesses. No child named Noah Patterson in case files. The words fell like hammer blows. Marshall Drummond's face had gone hard as stone. He turned to Graves with barely controlled fury. You brought me a fraudulent warrant based on a closed case to kidnap a child from his legal guardian. Do you have any idea what you've done? Graves took a step back, his hand moving toward his horse. This is a misunderstanding. If there are errors in the paperwork... Errors? Drummond's voice cracked like a whip. You falsified federal documents and attempted to use my authority to commit kidnapping. That's not an error. That's a crime. He gestured to his deputies. Arrest him. What followed happened fast. Graves tried to run, but the deputies were faster. Within moments, he was on the ground with his hands being bound, still protesting his innocence even as the evidence mounted against him. Check his saddlebags, Mitchell suggested. I'm betting you'll find correspondence with Kincaid and maybe even payment records. The deputies did, and their faces told the story before they even pulled out the letters. Detailed instructions from Vernon Kincaid about creating the false identity, promises of substantial payment upon successful removal of the child, and, most damningly, threats about what would happen if Graves failed to deliver. Marshall Drummond read the letters with an expression that could have melted steel. When he finished, he looked at Caleb. Mr. Hart, on behalf of the Territorial Marshal Service, I apologize. This warrant is fraudulent and void. Noah Sterling remains in your legal custody. Caleb felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This kind of corruption, it runs deep. Kincaid's got resources and connections, and desperate men do desperate things when their schemes fall apart. He paused, then added quietly, Watch your back. After the marshal and his deputies had ridden off with Graves in custody, Caleb turned to find Noah standing exactly where he'd left him, tears streaming silently down his small face. "You spoke," Caleb said gently. "You found your voice." Noah's mouth worked, struggling with words that had been locked away for so long. Finally, in a whisper that barely carried, Had to protect family." The other children surged forward then, surrounding Noah in a protective circle of arms and reassurance. Rowan was crying openly now, and Thomas had his hand on Noah's shoulder, and the twins were both talking at once about how brave he was, and Maddie was saying something about voices coming back when they were ready, and Elsie had her arms wrapped around Noah's waist like she'd never let go. Caleb watched them, his children, his family, his purpose, and felt something break open in his chest that had been sealed tight since Sarah died. Deputy Mitchell clapped him on the shoulder. "That was too close." "How did you know?" Caleb asked. "How did you figure out it was fraud?" "Because I know Vernon Kincaid and I know how men like him operate. When that warrant showed up 3 days after he lost in court, I knew something was wrong. So I started pulling threads, and the whole thing unraveled." Mitchell's expression turned grim. "But he's not done yet. This was just one move. He'll make another." "Let him try," Caleb said, his voice hard. "I'm done playing defense." That afternoon, Caleb rode into town with a purpose that had been building since the moment Kincaid first laid hands on Rowan at the train platform. He went straight to the newspaper office, where the editor, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen, who'd never been afraid to print uncomfortable truths, listened to his story with growing interest. "You're asking me to publish allegations against the richest man in the territory," she said when he finished. "Allegations that could get me sued into oblivion if you can't prove them." "I can prove them," Caleb said, and laid out everything. The fraudulent warrant, the letters found in Graves' saddlebags, the witness testimony from Mrs. Ashford about Kincaid's history with young workers, the pattern of corruption and manipulation. "The territorial marshal has the original evidence, but I've got copies. And I've got 7 children who can testify to what happened at that train platform." Margaret studied the documents for a long time, then looked up at Caleb with something like respect in her eyes. "This will destroy him, his reputation, his business relationships, probably his freedom if the territorial attorney decides to prosecute." "Good," Caleb said simply, "because men like him destroy lives every day and call it business. It's time someone held him accountable. Give me 3 days to verify sources and prepare the article. This has to be airtight, or it'll backfire on both of us." "You've got 2, Caleb said, "because I'm done waiting for the next attack." The article published on Friday morning, taking up the entire front page of the Red Willow Chronicle under the headline, "Corruption Exposed, Kincaid's Scheme to Exploit Orphan Children." It detailed everything: the fraudulent warrant, the attempted kidnapping, the pattern of questionable labor practices, the bribes and threats. It included statements from Marshal Drummond, quotes from Mrs. Ashford's evaluation, and testimony from former workers at Kincaid's operations who'd been too afraid to speak up before. The reaction was immediate and explosive. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside Kincaid's office. By evening, the territorial attorney had announced a formal investigation. By the next morning, 3 of Kincaid's business partners had publicly severed ties with him, and the bank that held most of his commercial notes was calling in his debts. Vernon Kincaid's empire began to crumble, and he had no one to blame but himself. But cornered animals are dangerous, and Kincaid was no exception. The attack came on Sunday night, 3 days after the article published. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of breaking glass. He was out of bed and grabbing his rifle before his mind fully processed what was happening. Fire. Someone had set fire to the barn. He ran downstairs to find Rowan already rallying the other children, her voice sharp with command. "Thomas, get the twins and Elsie to the root cellar. Maddie, you go with them. Noah, stay with me." "What's happening?" Elsie cried, her voice high with terror. "Just a fire, sweetheart," Rowan said with forced calm. "We're going to put it out, but you need to be safe first." Caleb met Rowan's eyes across the chaos and saw the same grim understanding there. This wasn't an accident. This was Kincaid making one final desperate move. "Get them to safety," he told her. "Then grab buckets and meet me at the well." She nodded and herded the younger children toward the cellar while Caleb ran outside. The barn was fully engulfed, flames climbing into the night sky and casting everything in hellish orange light. The horses were screaming inside. Caleb didn't think. He just moved, throwing open the barn doors and plunging into the smoke. The heat was immense, the air thick and choking, but he could hear the horses panicking in their stalls. One by one, he freed them, slapping their flanks to send them running into the night. He was leading the last horse out when a beam collapsed behind him, sending up a shower of sparks and cutting off his escape route. For a terrible moment, Caleb thought he wasn't going to make it out. Thought he'd survived Sarah's death and the fight for his children only to die in a fire set by a rich man's spite. Then hands were grabbing him, pulling him forward through the smoke. Thomas on one side, Rowan on the other, both of them ignoring his shouts to get back to safety. They emerged from the barn coughing and singed but alive, and immediately joined the bucket brigade that had formed. The other children were there too, passing buckets from the well with grim determination, and neighbors were arriving, summoned by the glow of the fire visible for miles. They fought the blaze for hours. By the time dawn broke, the barn was a smoking ruin, but the house and the other outbuildings had been saved. The horses had scattered but were unharmed, and standing at the edge of the yard, watching the destruction with cold satisfaction, was Vernon Kincaid. Caleb walked toward him with blood in his eye and murder in his heart, but Deputy Mitchell stepped between them. "Don't," Mitchell said quietly. "He's already finished. Don't give him the satisfaction of dragging you down with him." "He burned my barn," Caleb said, his voice shaking with rage. "He could have killed my children." "I know, and everyone here knows who did this." Mitchell gestured to the crowd of neighbors who'd come to help. "They're witnesses. The territorial marshal is already on his way based on the telegram I sent an hour ago. Kincaid's done, Caleb. Let the law handle it." Kincaid smiled, cold and cruel. "Prove it was me. Prove I had anything to do with this unfortunate accident." "I don't have to prove it," Mitchell replied. "You're standing here at dawn watching a fire you had to have known about before anyone could have sent word to town. That's suspicious enough to bring you in for questioning. And I'm betting when we dig into your whereabouts last night, we'll find enough to charge you with arson. Maybe attempted murder if we can prove you knew children were in the house." The smile faded from Kincaid's face. "Vernon Kincaid," Mitchell said formally, "you're under arrest on suspicion of arson. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you will." What followed was almost anticlimactic. Kincaid blustered and threatened, claimed he had alibis and lawyers and influential friends who would make this disappear, but his voice had lost its power, and the crowd watching his arrest had no sympathy left for a man who would burn children in their beds to satisfy his wounded pride. As the deputies led him away, Kincaid looked back at Caleb one last time. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Caleb replied quietly. "It is." And it was. The investigation revealed that Kincaid had paid 2 drifters to set the fire, and both men testified against him in exchange for reduced sentences. The territorial attorney added arson and attempted murder to the existing charges of fraud and corruption. Kincaid's assets were seized to cover his debts, his property auctioned off, and he was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. The man who'd thought he owned half the county ended up with nothing but a cell and the knowledge that he'd been brought down by the same people he'd tried to treat as property. In the months that followed, life at the Hart Ranch settled into something that felt almost miraculous in its ordinary beauty. The barn was rebuilt with help from neighbors who'd been quietly grateful to see Kincaid fall. The horses came back one by one, and Thomas proved to have a gift for training them. Maddie's humming turned into singing, and she taught the twins songs their mother used to sing. Noah spoke more and more, his voice growing stronger as his nightmares began to fade. Rowan slowly, incrementally, stopped carrying the knife under her pillow. She still checked the locks every night and still positioned herself between potential threats and the younger children, but the sharp edges of her fear began to dull. She started to laugh, real laughter, not the bitter sound of someone who'd forgotten how joy felt. And Elsie, who'd spent 5 years learning that adults leave, finally accepted that Caleb wasn't going anywhere. She still climbed into his lap when she was scared or tired, but she also ran and played with the twins, and sometimes she'd go whole hours without checking to make sure he was still there. The 6-month oversight period ended with a visit from Mrs. Ashford, who walked through the house with her notebook and her critical eye and finally allowed herself a real smile. "They're thriving," she said to Caleb as they stood on the porch watching the children play in the spring sunshine. "All 7 of them. Whatever you're doing, Mr. Hart, keep doing it." "I'm just showing up," Caleb said. "Every day, that's all." "That's everything," she corrected. "More than you know." When the final court date arrived to make the guardianship permanent and unrestricted, all 7 children insisted on attending. They dressed in their best clothes and stood in the courtroom with their spines straight and their hands linked, a united front. Judge Whitmore looked at them over his reading glasses, then at Caleb, then at the reports before him. "Mr. Hart," he said, "I've reviewed the oversight reports, interviewed the children again as required by law, and considered all relevant factors. I'm prepared to finalize this guardianship arrangement." He paused, then added with the ghost of a smile, "Though I suspect these children would riot if I tried to do otherwise." "Damn right we would," Rowan muttered, and Thomas elbowed her. The judge's smile widened. "Language, young lady. But yes, I take your point. This court hereby grants final and permanent guardianship of Rowan Hale, Thomas Brennan, Matilda Fletcher, Jonah and Micah Davis, Noah Sterling, and Elsie Whitfield to Caleb Hart, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. Congratulations, Mr. Hart. You're officially a father of 7. The gavel came down, and this time the sound was a beginning, not an ending. That night, Caleb stood in the kitchen of his house, their house, and watched 7 children gathered around the table for dinner. They argued about chores and teased each other and stole food from each other's plates and laughed with the unself-conscious joy of children who finally felt safe enough to be children. Rowan caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Nothing," Caleb said, "just thinking about how quiet this place used to be." "You miss it?" Thomas asked, something vulnerable beneath the casual question. Caleb looked around the table, at faces that had arrived hollow and haunted and now shone with life and possibility. At children who'd been labeled broken and defective and unwanted, and had proved every single one of those labels wrong just by surviving and choosing to trust one more time. "Not for a second," he said. "Not for a single second." Later, after the dishes were washed and the younger children were in bed, Caleb sat on the porch with Rowan and Thomas. The spring night was cool and clear, the stars burning bright overhead, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. "I've been thinking," Rowan said carefully, "about what happens next. When we're older. When we don't need you anymore." "You'll always need me," Caleb said. "Maybe not the same way, but family doesn't stop being family just because you grow up." "But we're not really," she started, then stopped. "Not really what?" "Not really family?" Caleb turned to look at her. "Rowan, you're my daughter. Thomas is my son. All 7 of you are mine, as much as if I'd been there the day you were born. That doesn't change. Not ever." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd have this. A home. A father. People who stayed." "Well, you've got it now," Caleb said. "All of it, whether you like it or not." Thomas laughed quietly. "We like it." "Good, because you're stuck with me." They sat in comfortable silence, 3 parts of a whole that had been assembled from broken pieces and somehow made into something stronger than any of them had been alone. Inside the house, Elsie called out in her sleep, not a nightmare, just a child's murmur, and Caleb heard Maddie's voice soothing her back to quiet. The twins were whispering in their room, probably plotting some mischief for tomorrow. Noah's footsteps crossed the floor overhead, the creaking boards a reassuring reminder that he was real and present and learning to exist in the world again. This was family, not perfect, not without scars and shadows and the weight of everything that had come before, but real and chosen and held together by something stronger than blood or obligation. It was held together by the simple, revolutionary act of showing up every day and choosing to stay. Caleb Hart had buried his first family 4 months before finding his second, and while nothing could replace Sarah or erase the grief of losing her, he'd learned that the human heart had a remarkable capacity to expand, to hold old love and new love simultaneously, to honor what was lost while embracing what remained. 7 children had arrived on a train platform wearing tags that named them broken. 7 children had found a man hollow with grief who needed them as much as they needed him. And together, they'd built something the world had tried to tell them was impossible. They'd built a home. The unwanted were wanted now. The broken were whole. The lost were found. And in a valley in Wyoming territory, in a house that rang with laughter and argument and all the messy, beautiful chaos of family, 8 people who'd been discarded by the world discovered that being chosen was the most powerful force of all. They were home. Finally, completely, irrevocably home. And no one, not Vernon Kincaid or the Children's Aid Society or the whole weight of a system designed to sort people into categories of worthy and worthless, could ever take that away from them again.